Hi, and welcome to Trauma Free Relationship. If you're new to this channel, thanks for tuning in. And if you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Tom Philp, and I've been working with couples and individuals for decades, helping them to resolve or break those painful patterns that keep them stuck so that they can communicate better, repair more quickly, and stay connected longer. Now, I'm excited about our episode today, not because it's the easiest thing to talk about, but because I think it's really important to talk about. And that is, why do couples trigger each other so often? Why is it that the person we're with and we've been in this relationship with for quite some time, once sort of the bloom is off the rose, right? Once we settle into day-to-day life, the immediate love bombing feelings have kind of faded a little bit. Why is it that now all of a sudden this person that we thought actually met all of our needs, we're finding it seems they have some flaws? And once you get into a relationship more long-term, you're more likely to be triggered by your partner. So we're going to talk about what's the psychology behind why couples trigger each other in a relationship. Now, let me say this too. It's really important. All couples get triggered. Healthy couples, dysfunctional couples, toxic couples, you name it across the board, right? Think about a broad spectrum of couples from the most healthy, and I don't want to say perfect because there's no such thing, but from a relatively healthy all the way to a couple that may be more dysfunctional in their relationship. They all get triggered. So it's not different. It's not new to you. You're not alone in this. Nothing's broken in you per se. But this is something that happens in a lot of relationships. And what it often means, and we're going to dive into this in more detail here in a minute, what it often means is there's probably something below the surface that's unhealed. Now, if we get triggered, first of all, it doesn't mean we're automatically in fight or flight. Being triggered means that you're starting to get activated, that you sense something has now upset you, hurt you, activated your nervous system in some way. How do we know that we're not completely activated or in fight or flight yet? If you can even say to yourself or your partner, I've been triggered, then you're only triggered. You're not completely activated yet. When we get into fight or flight, it's much more difficult for us to say we're triggered. What we're usually doing is focusing on the source of the threat. So this is something that happens in a range of couples. It's not unique to you, but it is painful, and it very often causes cycles, which is what we really want to dig in on and target so that we can learn how to break those cycles, to work through the triggers in a way that leaves us feeling more safe and connected with our partner. Okay, let's dig in. All right, we're going to break this down into three different parts. We're going to talk about the nervous system, safety versus threat specifically. We're going to talk about attachment needs, and then finally we're going to talk about meaning making. What is the story we tell ourselves about these particular triggers? Let's start with the nervous system. Now, if you've heard this channel at all, my podcast, any of my stuff, I talk a lot about the nervous system, and I talk about what it is like in times of threat versus what it is like when it feels safe. And when our nervous system is activated, then what that usually means is it's detecting something that feels like an emotional threat, whether that be our partner, another person, whether that be an environment we might be in. I've said this before, our bodies are our first responders. If we are in tune with our bodies, they usually are the first responders to telling us something's not right here, something's amiss, something's causing some kind of anxiety, or I feel like I've been hurt by something that is said or a tone that's been used. Something is not working for me in this environment, in this moment. And when that happens, then we usually get triggered. And what that means is our nervous system is beginning to prepare itself. Think about it like a green light, yellow light, red light system. When we're on a green light system, we feel safe. We feel safe with our partner. We feel safe at work, with our colleagues, or in an environment. We might feel safe at a party. We are relatively feeling safe, and that is sort of an unconscious question we constantly ask ourselves. Am I safe? And I don't think it's explicit. I don't think we're using that language every time we walk into a room, but our body's always asking us that. That's the way we're built. We're built for connection as much as we're built for protection. And part of our protecting ourselves is asking ourselves, am I safe in this moment? And our bodies are usually the first responders for that. So when we sense that we're not feeling completely safe, that's often when we get triggered. And when we get triggered, then usually our nervous system begins to get activated. And it begins really honing in on what might that threat be. What is that person or environment that might be making us feel relatively unsafe in this moment? And in doing so, we tend to filter out whatever else might be happening, even if it might be making us feel safe. What is going to make us feel safe is to neutralize that threat. And that, in this case, might be our partner. It might be our partner saying to us, hey, that didn't come out quite right. Can I roll that back and start over? That came out with a tone, or, I really didn't mean it as fierce as it sounded. And so all of a sudden, our body now goes, oh, okay, that feels much better. Now what feels like a threat has been neutralized, and now my body can relax a little bit. And so we want to hone in on those threats. And so being triggered means that your nervous system is activated, and it's beginning to look for and hone in on what might be the source of those threats. Very, very important to be able to understand that, because being able to understand, oh, this is my body's way of keeping me safe is crucial to the next couple of steps. And so your body is doing its very best. Your nervous system is doing its very best trying to keep you safe emotionally at all times, obviously physically too. But when we talk about relational stuff, we talk about more like an emotional threat, not physical threats. And so the first part of this is when something feels off, right? It can be triggering, and it can trigger a response, and it can begin to activate. If that response is not neutralized, if it is not, if it's not, let's say, go from yellow, because like a yellow light would be triggering response, and then if it persists, then it's going to go to a red light, meaning it's going to go into full-blown fight or flight. Now you've completely moved into a different part of your brain that is only activated in times of threat. And so recognizing how I go from green light to yellow light to red light can really help you begin to understand and map out what happens in my internal landscape when I get triggered. What is a potential source of that trigger for me? In a lot of couples, it's facial expressions or tone of voice by their partner. And then that usually moves me into a yellow light situation where my nervous system is now activated. I'm now honing in on what feels threatening in that moment, either threatening to me as a person, how I see myself, my identity, or threatening to our relationship. And don't underestimate how your brain reacts to what feels like a threat to the relationship. We are made for connection. That's not a nice to have. Being made for connection is a biological imperative. It is baked deep into our DNA. And when we feel like our relationship is being threatened, like it could dissolve, it could end, that should light up your nervous system in a big way. So don't underestimate that, because you're going to physiologically respond to a threat in your relationship. And it can very quickly move you from green right past yellow, right into the red, into the fight or flight. And so when we do that, then of course, more often than not, we begin to move into our attachment styles, either avoidant or pursuant. Those are the two most common, because then we have an attachment threat, a relationship threat, we're going to try to cope with that. And in doing so, try to preserve the relationship in that moment the best way we know how. So that's a little bit about the nervous system response and what happens when we get triggered. The second part to this is the attachment needs. And so, as I said, we're wired for connection, closeness, and reassurance. And so when we get triggered, it often feels like we're in fear of losing that connection. So not being heard feels like rejection. Distance might feel like abandonment, or criticism might make us feel like we're not good enough. And so in those moments, it can amplify those negative feelings about us, and it can amplify those unmet attachment needs in the moment. And this is why I say usually it's one of two things that feels like the biggest threat. One, I'm being completely misunderstood. And so your perception of me does not match how I see myself. I feel like what you're telling me in this moment is I'm a bad person, a bad partner, or I failed you somehow. And my experience of myself might be completely different. So it throws me into dissonance, cognitive dissonance there. And when that happens, I feel like there's a real threat against the way I see myself, which means I'm also trying to preserve my self-esteem in that moment. And then, of course, the other kind of threat, as I mentioned, is a threat to the relationship. That attachment bond that we have is not just a nice to have. It's not just, oh, I'm attached to my partner, we love each other, or whatever kind of bond that means to that person. This is a biological response we have to wanting that person to be the person that matters the most to us in our life, and that we matter the most to them. And when that gets messed with, when we get triggered by each other, that formula gets out of sync and begins to quickly dissolve. And when that happens, all of a sudden our attachment needs are not being met. And so this is the second piece to being triggered. The first piece is that something happens and we begin to move our way towards a red light, fight or flight system. We might pass through a yellow light, but not always. But certainly we're making our way there. This brings up the fear of an attachment loss of some kind, rejection, abandonment, not mattering to our partner, not feeling like our partner is caring for us in this moment. And so that's the second part that really comes along with these triggers. And when that shows up with partners, that leads specifically right into the meaning-making part of this. And what I mean by this is, what is the story we begin to tell ourselves in those moments when we've been triggered and activated and our nervous system is either in fight or flight or making its way there? When all of a sudden our needs in this relationship, specifically our relational or attachment needs, are not being met, we make meaning of that experience. And the meaning we have of that experience is really important, because oftentimes what can happen is we can take past experiences that are similar in meaning and we can overlay them into our current experience with our partner. It's a term called transference. Maybe someday I'll do an episode on that alone. But it's very common, and all people do it, healthy people as well as more dysfunctional people or people that might have some mental disorders. It's very common for all kinds of people. So there's nothing wrong with you if you have transference. I use transference at times. My partner uses transference. We all do this. And we do this because our brain is built to make meaning of experiences. And when it has an experience and it's locked in on a particular meaning that helps it make sense of what happened and why it happened, it creates a little file in a drawer. And it says, okay, this experience means this to us. And now I've got a file in the file cabinet of my memory. And if anything comes close to being similar, then what I do is I just pull out this file from the file drawer and I go, aha, this is similar to what's happening. I bet this is the same thing that happened in the past. And so oftentimes the story we tell ourselves is the meaning file that we pull from the drawer, and we say, once again, when my partner triggers me or uses that tone or pulls away from me or shuts down, this tells me once again that I'm not getting it right. I'm incapable of being loved. I'm not worthy of it. I'm not ever going to measure up. And the only thing I can do is try to save whatever sort of self-esteem I might have, and I'm just going to shut down and remove myself, either physically or emotionally, from the situation. Or if we reverse that and we look at it from a more anxious attachment standpoint, then what that might say to that person is, once again, I'm never going to get the love that I need. I have to work harder than anybody else to try to just simply be loved in my relationships. Why is it my partner always pulls away from me or shuts down when I try to get them to love me the way I need? Why is it so hard? What is wrong with me that I can't get the love that I want? And it's going to pull that file out of the cabinet and it's going to say, aha, I know why. Because of these experiences in the past, it has a similar meaning and it must mean the same thing. It must mean there's something broken in me, or there's something defective, or I'm wrong somehow, or my partner is incapable of loving me the way I need, or a whole host of other reasons. You could probably easily add your own line in there that says, in these types of situations, I don't get the love I desire because blank, and you can just add your own line. And there can be lots of different ones. But oftentimes, when we get triggered in our relationship, these three things happen. One is it activates our nervous system, heading towards fight or flight. Two, it pulls online those unmet needs that are occurring in that moment in the relationship. And they're amplified all that much more, and they feel all that much more threatening to us because of what's happening. And three, we try to make sense of what's happening by oftentimes reaching back into a file that we've had from similar past experiences, because this is the way our brain works, and make sense and tell ourselves a story of what's happening in this moment, which oftentimes, because of the story that we're locked into, oftentimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. What do I mean by that? If I'm a more anxiously attached person and my partner did something that's now activated me, it's triggered me, and now I'm really getting very anxious, and I feel like my partner's beginning to shut down and move away, I might respond by all of a sudden putting all kinds of pressure on my partner to resolve this issue that's going on between us. I might put more pressure on my partner to not shut down, to open up, and I may bombard them with 1,000 questions, so it almost feels like they're being interrogated, like an attorney. I might have all my anxiety that I'm directing onto them as well, and I might be honed specifically in on the one thing they're doing that feels like the biggest threat. And all of this because I'm telling myself the story that in this moment, my partner will not love me the way I need to be loved. And in this moment, I somehow am incapable of being loved once again. And so these three things can really get activated, and they can act as a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the more that person might push their partner to resolve the issue, to hear them, to understand them, to empathize deep with the pain that they're feeling, the more they might shut down. And this is why I focus so much in on cycles, because this cycle that happens, while there's layers below it that are stacking up and adding and contributing to the cycle, if the couple does not learn how to deactivate their cycles, if they don't learn how to regulate themselves better, then what happens is you can never get to those deeper layers. And those partners will never be able to have a different experience of each other and of themselves for the hurt they've sustained that actually holds the story they're telling themselves in any different kind of way. And so they end up repeating those experiences because the cycle repeats as well, over and over and over. So the psychology behind why couples trigger each other, it's ultimately because we have some unhealed wounds. And those wounds oftentimes give rise to emotional dysregulation, which is the engine to what creates the cycles. It's the fuel for the cycles in the relationship. And I hope you can kind of see how I've spelled that out a little bit and what that might look like in the relationship. So, this is really important to be able to kind of piece this stuff together. And it's important not just to have sort of um, the head knowledge of it, but to be able to understand what is your lived experience of this. I really feel like we are in a day and age where we've got plenty of information, and I know I'm contributing to it, lots of information. What we need to do is we need to figure out the information that resonates with us, not just the positive stuff, but the stuff that runs a little bit contrary or challenges us in certain ways, that doesn't sit easy with us, that we feel uncomfortable with. And we need to create experiences with that information, experiences that help us be the best version of ourselves. So it's not always just more information. A lot of times it is, how do I take that information and how do I apply that to my life and my relationships? And that's part of what we do for couples and individuals in our cycle reset program, right? There's tons of information in there, but more importantly, how can we give you a different experience so that you show up differently in your relationship? And so in this particular case, the psychology behind why do couples trigger each other is because we've got some wounds that aren't always healed. And when those get poked at, when that scab gets scraped up against or rubbed up against, then it triggers sometimes those old wounds, and especially those old stories that keep us stuck. So the goal is to take this information, even if it's uncomfortable, and figure out what piece of this do I need to start working on? Do I need to understand more of my triggers? Do I need to start practicing more regulation techniques so I can stay more regulated? Or do I need somehow to understand more of the story I tell myself in those moments so that it doesn't come to define and dominate so much of my life and my relationships?